Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you are doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, on today's video, we are going to be taking a close look at Stars of Akarios. And this is going to be kind of my first impressions, maybe final impressions, lasting impressions. I hesitate to call this a review because I have not played enough of the game to give a solid review. I have played through the prologue of the campaign, and in that prologue, you experience all three of the major portions of the game, the major phases, and that is space combat, space combat, space exploration, and planetary exploration. And you also learn about upgrading your ship, how to play the game, how to control the enemies. So you basically get a nice little overview of the entire game. And that is what I am basing this video on. So I've heard a couple people for shorthand call Stars of Akarios Gloomhaven in space. And while there are a few similarities to Gloomhaven, I don't think that comparison is apt. The main thing that is like Gloomhaven is one, it is a scenario and campaign based game, and two, it uses a deck of modifier cards for the combat. But as far as I'm concerned, that is where the similarities that end. It does not feel to me like Gloomhaven in space. I've also had a couple people ask if this game is anything like Xayah Legends of a Drift System. And again, I think the answer is no. The only real similarity between Stars of Akarios and Xayah is that it is set in space and it is kind of a space opera style game. What Stars of Akarios is, as far as I'm concerned, most is a combination of a game book and a board game. Because more so than many other campaign and scenario based games that use a large campaign or scenario book, the scenario book in Stars of Akarios has a lot of similarities to a game book. There are a lot of choices to be made. There are different paths to take, a lot of them. There are lots of passages to read and flipping back and forth. There are side missions. There are things you can explore, things you can miss. And it really does feel like a game book more so than just a scenario guide. And as far as I can tell, it has a lot more options of choice in how you are using the scenario book while you are playing the game. More options for choice, more situations where you are going to pick a path than games like Gloomhaven or games like Madara or even something like Sword and Sorcery. So while I was playing the game, especially during the space exploration and the planetary exploration, I was reminded of a kind of a super game book. And I think that Stars of Akarios straddles that line pretty well. And while I do ultimately think that Stars of Akarios is a good game, it's very well designed, it's very well made, and I think a lot of people are really going to love this game. Ultimately, I don't think it is a game for me, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to sell it. And we're going to get to those reasons why. But first, I want to talk about 10 things that I really do like about this game. And those are not in like a numerical order. We're just going to go through from 1 to 10. So let's start with number 1. So on the Dungeon Dive Facebook group, somebody asked, I posted some pictures of the game and somebody asked me for my first impressions. And that was when I was setting up the game. So my first impressions were really first impressions. And one of the things that I was most impressed about was the lack of chits in this game. All of the chits that you need to keep track of things during the game can fit in this one little 2-ounce container. I love this. Nothing fills me with more anxiety than hundreds of chits, and hundreds of chits are like my least favorite selling point of a game. When I pick up a game box and it says over 200 chits, I'm like, oh my God, okay. One, I have to store those. Two, I'm going to be going in and out of boxes while I am playing, digging through, finding chits, having to remember what they are. I don't like that. I don't like a ton of chits. Having just this few chits is really a really good thing. I know that seems silly, but for me, I was like, okay, I am already on board with this game. Yes, there are a few other little pieces, such as some of these nebulae tiles or some small planet tiles or asteroids or large planet tiles, but these are just going to be set up on the board during space combat. And these are terrain. So I don't really consider these to be those kind of like status chits or the kind of chits that I am talking about here. So how do you keep track of your status conditions? Status conditions are kept track on the player board and the enemy board. They have corresponding tracks there where when you get a status effect, you will take a cube and you will just slot it in to that status. You can be in stealth, you can be stunned, you can be slowed, you can have a hull breach, target lock, or you can have your radar jammed. And so those are the only statuses in the game. And you just simply add a cube when you get one of those statuses. And I think that is pretty great. And this goes on to my number two. And my number two thing that I love is the player boards. They are really well designed. Everything you need to play the game is basically right here. You have all of your basic moves that you can take and your basic combat. When you upgrade your engines, you will place your upgraded engine cards here in these slots, and then those will give you additional maneuvers. When you upgrade your weapons, you will put your upgraded weapons in these slots, and those will give you different ways to attack. And then you have your tech that you can outfit your ship with, your different ship abilities, and your pilot abilities. And eventually you can also get a co-pilot card. Now, some of these abilities also have a supply count, and they take a certain number of supply to use, and you can keep track of all of those supplies based on each card has a little supply track, and you just move the cube down when you use that card, and so it's really easy to keep track of everything. It also has spaces here for your hull and your shields and your stress. And when you are exploring a planet, those will coincide to your pilot's stats for their energy and their health. And then you have a slot here for your pilot where you can keep track of who your pilot is and their stats. And also a slot here for your ship. So everything that you need to play is right here on the board. It tells you everything that you need, and it's just really, really well designed. And the same goes for the little enemy boards. I really appreciate this attention to detail and this kind of component quality. Okay, so number three is for a large game. For a game of this size, this kind of epic nature, this epic scope, Stars of Akarios is really easy to set up and take down. This is everything that I needed to finish the prologue. It all fits on my somewhat small gaming table. Viewers of the Dungeon Dive will know that I have a very small hobby room and a very small gaming table, and everything fits pretty easily with a little side TV tray that I sometimes go into to pick out some cards. Now, one of the reasons why everything fits so easily is you do have this really nice tray here that keeps track of all of your cards. So the cards that you're not using at that moment, they can be stored away in here very easily. And everything else just fits in its spot. And you don't need a ton of stuff out for each segment of the game. So it's very easy to set up, and it is also very easy to take down. Again, that is another difference between this and Gloomhaven, which Gloomhaven famously has a very long setup time and a very long breakdown time, and it adds a lot of time to the game. I could probably have this game completely packed away and back on my shelf in 5 minutes. It might take 10 minutes to reset up to start my campaign again. So that is another big bonus. Okay, number four. The fourth thing I really like about this game is the modifier deck. So this is where the comparison to Gloomhaven makes a lot of sense. because combat in this game is the results of your combat of you attacking are dictated by these modifier cards, where these are going to tell you if you add a value or subtract a value, or you don't add a value, or you miss to your combat roll. So you might add 1 damage, you might take away a damage, you might have a 0. There is 1 miss in here, and there is also a -2 in here. And so these are pretty standard. This is your starting deck here. It does have 20 cards. And as you level up your character, you are going to have different opportunities to add certain cards to your deck. But what's cool about that is you aren't just adding modifiers. You aren't just adding more +1s or more +2s or more ×2s. You aren't just removing negative cards. Sometimes you will be adding cards such as this, which allows you to resupply one of your pieces of gear. So you can use this card to add more supply tokens. Sometimes you will be adding cards to your deck that will allow you to repair your hull. Sometimes you will be adding cards that will allow you to target enemy ships better, or maybe hack enemy ships. So you will be able to add these combat ability cards to your deck. Additionally, these cards that you add to your deck have this rollover modifier here. And that means that if you drew this card, then you get to keep drawing a card. And if you drew this, and then this, and then this maybe, and then finally you drew this, then that would be your combat stack for that attack. And you could do everything that you needed to do until you did damage. However, there is a little bit of kind of a pressure luck element there, because if you draw a whole bunch of cards and you get to that miss at the end, well, then all of those cards are wasted. I really do like that system. I think it makes it very interesting. I'm not a fan of how much space all of these modifier cards take, because in that tray, a huge portion of that tray is filled with different modifier cards. There are a lot. But I do like the system of adding more than just bonuses to the modifier deck. I don't remember if Gloomhaven had that opportunity to add other kinds of cards to your combat deck. I don't think I played the game enough to get to that point, but this introduces that element pretty quickly into the game, and it allows for me to imagine it getting even more interesting. Another thing that's pretty cool is this game does have a fail forward mechanism in its campaign structure. So when you lose a campaign, when you lose a scenario in the campaign, you are going to mark off this bolster boost, these little spots on your character card. And then for every one that you have filled in, when you go to your space combat missions, you're going to be adding another ×2. So if you are like kind of sucking at the space combat, the next time you go to space combat, it's going to be a little easier because you're going to have an additional ×2 damage modifier in your deck. I like that. It's a good way to balance the game for those of us who aren't great at strategy style games. Very, very cool. Okay, so the next thing that I really like about the game is the dice action mechanism. I love this kind of thing in games. It's one of my favorite mechanisms in games. And that is when you get to roll dice and you get to assign those dice to different actions. I love this mechanism. And so in this game, you normally start with 4d6 that are going to have your different actions on there. But when you are playing with a single player, a single ship, you get to have 5 dice. And then you roll those dice, and those are going to tell you what you can do. This symbol here, you're going to use for combat maneuvers. This symbol here, you are going to use as maneuvering, as movement. And then this symbol here is a wild, but it is also a stress symbol. And we're going to talk about stress a little later. And then this symbol here is a wild that can be used for combat or moving. And then those symbols are assigned to these different actions. So to do this flank maneuver, I would need to assign a movement die, or I could assign that wild, or I could assign that wild and take a point of stress. This particular proton blast here, since those two dice are combined, I would have to assign two dice. So one combat die and a wild. And then I could assign those, and then I could perform that attack. That attack also takes one supply to use, so I would lower my supply. Some actions will have a plus symbol. If you use the plus symbol, then I could do a weak attack, or I could add an additional attack die to do the strong version of that attack. Some of these where they are separated without a plus, that means you can do those twice in a round. So you could do that twice, you could do that twice. You can turn. This one is a little weird because the dice are separate, but you have to spend 3 dice to do this repair action. I wish that these were all 3 were joined together. It would just make more sense, and it would be more consistent with the other dice iconography. But I really enjoy this kind of system in games, and this system is also used for when you are exploring planets, and we'll go over that in just a minute. So the 6th thing I really like is going to further touch upon this stress system. So when you roll one of these stress die, these stressed faces, you can spin that as a wild, but you have to take a point of stress. And this is really cool because it's like your pilot is exerting herself to do things, to go above and beyond, to do more heroic things at a cost. And it's kind of a push your luck thing because as you go up on this stress track at 3, 5, 7, and 10, you will have to face negative consequences. And some of those negative consequences are from this trauma deck. So when you hit this trauma, when you hit these trauma spots, you are going to be drawing one of these trauma cards, and then you're going to have to be dealing with the negative consequences of your pilot going through too much stress. Stress can also be spent on certain maneuvers. So let's say that you wanted to take a movement here, but you didn't want to complete the movement. Normally, you need to complete the whole movement. You need to do exactly what it is shown for each of these movements. So for this one, it's moving 3 forward. For this one, it's moving 1 forward and either turning to the left or the right. For this flank action, you are moving 3 forward and then kind of doing a U-turn. But if you wanted to stop short and maybe only go up 2, or maybe just go for a quick left turn, or maybe you just wanted to go up 1, then you could spend a point of stress in order to stop short. So a really interesting idea. I like that. I like how stress is spent as a currency. And I also really enjoy how you can use it to push your pilot to do more heroic things. And it is a finite resource, and you do have to pay the prices for when you use it. Another thing that I really enjoy is the space combat. The space combat takes place on this board here, and you will be putting down a certain terrain that will have impact. So when you fly through asteroids, you take a point of hull damage. When you fly through nebulae, you will take a point of shield damage. And these big planets, those just count as like blocking terrain. But the combat is really fast paced, and it is really rewarding because of the way the maneuvering works and how you have to complete your movement or spend stress to stop short. It is a lot. There is a lot of facing, and positioning is very important. So this is one game where I do think the minis will actually kind of add something because it's just a little easier to keep track of where you are facing. But you want to try to flank your opponents. When you are flanking, you will get different types of advantage. They have all of the squares behind them will count towards flanking advantage. And it is really clever how the movement works because you have these hexes. Sometimes you just can't get quite lined up properly. So you have to think about how you're going to be moving, turning, flanking, and positioning yourself on the board. And when you do come up with a really cool combination of turning, making U-turns, flying forward, or doing these flanking maneuvers, and there are all kinds of different maneuvers. that you can get from your engine deck. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different types of movement that you can get. So this is super cool. I really do like this. And each one of these is kind of like adding a different move to a chess piece, because the combat is a little chess-like in how you do need to think about your positioning. At the same time, the combat cards, the AI cards for the enemies are all really cool as well. At the bottom, they have a little command line that they are going to follow. And then at the top, it's going to tell what they will do. So here they will attack. Okay, if they don't have a target, if they have a target, they will attack, then they will turn, then they will move. If they don't have a target, they will turn, then move, and then they will take a chance to attack. And then up here, it shows what kind of movement they do when they do have a movement. And then it shows their attack pattern. It shows how much damage they do, how many ships they can target, and the range, if there is any range, such as there. And then also sometimes when you get attacked, you will take a negative combat effect. And each of the ship classes of the enemy will have their own combat deck. So here we have the Ronin frigates and the Ronin scouts, and they do feel different. I was constantly kind of surprised that, like, oh wow, they did this. They like teamed up on me somehow with these with these simple random AI cards. But I always felt cool when I was fighting. It was fun when I was able to pull off a cool move, like coming around an asteroid field and maybe making this huge flanking move and coming up behind a frigate and taking him out, or avoiding putting myself in a position where I was unable to be attacked by the enemy. Really cool, really fun. It's quick, it's pretty easy, and I think it just is rewarding and fun. Okay, so number 8 has to do with space and planetary exploration. I'm going to show you a few cards here. This might be considered a spoiler, but this is all from the prologue. This is all things that you're going to encounter while you are learning to play the game. So each of these star sectors in the game, and I think there are about 5 or so different sectors, are going to have these map cards, which when you play, you are going to be docking your little ships in the Sparrow here, and that is like the mothership that docks all of your pilots' ships. And then you are going to be in between scenarios. You are going to be exploring the world, the space, the different star systems. And you will start on the start card, and then depending on where you go, you will connect the different cards. So this card, you will go to 2-1, and then from here you have different choices. You can go to 3-1 or 3-2. If you went to 3-1, you would have here. And then down here, if you come across this symbol, that tells you that you have an event, and then you would draw one of your event cards. Each of these sectors has a handful of event cards. The starting sector only has 2. I would like to see a lot more of these at some point. That is one of the main random elements of the game. But as you explore more, you might come across these more complex situations here where you have a number of different things that you can interact with. You might also see these blue scout symbols there. Those are side missions. So there are a bunch of side missions in the scenario book, and you can explore those or you can ignore them. Sometimes they are just short little story elements. Sometimes they will be short little choose your own adventure elements. Sometimes they might even be full space combat. You never really know what you're going to get into until you explore one. These will coincide with the different scenarios in the book. Some of these scenarios do have prerequisites where you need to have certain keywords checked off on your progress page here, on your progress report, in order to interact with them. For instance, this 121, I went there, but I did not have the proper thing marked off yet. So then I had to go to 008. And these are different warp zones where you can go to different star sectors. So for instance, this 008, what you're going to learn is actually this planet here, and you are going to go and you are going to be exploring that planet when you land, and that is going to end space exploration, and then you're going to have planetary exploration. And this planetary exploration is kind of a little mini game of Seventh Continent, and you are going to be exploring from zone to zone, from tile to tile. you're going to be spending your heroes, your pilots' energy as you are going through exploring. You're going to be rolling your dice to do certain. You need to do certain checks that are going to be shown on the cards here. So to explore in this direction, you need to commit one of your dice that is either a movement or a combat phase in order to explore tile 11. Maybe you want to take a look at what's going on here. Well, then you need to do, I think this is like a dexterity check, and you need to have 3 green die, 3 green faces in order to pass that check. And then you would read that paragraph in the book. To investigate this, you need to commit 1 die of either green or orange, and then you would read paragraph 10 in the book. And there are all kinds of different things you can go on in here. The passages for exploring the combat or the planetary combat are very detailed. And this is where I think the writing in the book is pretty good, because these are short passages. And there are all kinds of different events. There are different skill challenges that you have to go. There are certain choices you can make. And there are a lot of opportunities to really get down into the nitty-gritty and explore these different systems. So I like how all 3 phases of the game work together. You start in space, you go down to planets, and then you have space combat. Okay, so the 9th thing that I like is this game is really easy to manage solo. The only thing that you do different when you're playing just a lone wolf mode solo is instead of 4 action dice, you get 5. That's it. Everything else is exactly the same. There is no scaling you have to do. There aren't things that you don't get to use or special AI things that you have to run, no automata sheets or anything. It's really easy. It scales pretty well solo, and I like that. And this does kind of coincide with my number 10. So we'll just talk about both of these together, 9 and 10. And 10 is that it does fit on my small table. I was a little afraid that I would not be able to play this game because of how expansive in scope it was. But each section of the game is played separately. So you don't need to keep your space cards, your planet cards, and your space combat board set up all the time. You do one, then you do the other, and then you do the other. So it doesn't take up a ton of space. And if you need to keep track of where you've been on a certain planet, then you can just stack those cards up and put those face up on top of your deck. And then when you return it, you'll just lay those out in the proper order. Very handy, very easy to do. That is also how you save your game, because you will just stack things up. All the face up things are the things you've already done. Anything face down is something that you haven't explored yet. So very easy to save, very easy to pack up. Your pilots come with their own little game tray here. You can keep everything in there. You can very easily keep track of all of your stats and stuff on these pages here. And it's a very manageable game for the solo player, and I really appreciate that. Okay, so after these 10 great things, after 10 things that I really like about this game, let's talk about why I'm probably not going to be keeping the game. And the main reason, and it just comes down to the commitment, the time commitment for a campaign style game. I know that as soon as I box this up and put it on my shelf, the chances of me getting this game out again are slim to none. And that's just the nature of, I think, having a small house, having only one hobby room with one table, not being able to keep things set up, and just having to have new things show up on the channel means that I need games that I can play in one-offs, or games that I can play quickly. It is not a judgment value. I'm not passing judgment on the game. I'm passing judgment on the type of game player that I am, and just the nature of just having this kind of channel. Unfortunately, and I have the stats to back this up, as I do long series of videos focused on one game, each subsequent video in that series gets fewer and fewer hits. And it is important, if I want to grow the channel, to have things that continue to get more hits. And that's just the nature of YouTube, and I can't really get away from that. But I think this game is really good. And I think for most people are really going to like this game, I think. It has a lot to offer. I really, really wish there was a way to play an entire game from zero to hero in about 3 hours, in which could experience a complete beginning, middle, and end of the game that would allow me the opportunity to engage with the space exploration, planetary exploration, and combat. If there was just some way to play the game where you didn't have to spend time focused on a campaign, and maybe you had random space events and random planet events and random scenarios that had to do with your space combat, and then you could also take a hero or a pilot from zero to hero and a ship from basic to upgraded, all in the span of about 3 hours. That would be fantastic. I would love that so much. I would really would. Maybe if this game is successful in an upcoming Kickstarter for like the reprint and expansion, maybe they'll have a way to just do one-off games where you get to experience everything. You could do a single scenario, but you wouldn't be able to experience the entirety of what the game has to offer. And I would just love a condensed version of the game. But again, this is not a judgment on the game. This is just a judgment on the kind of game player I am and the nature of having a hobby channel like mine in the situation that I am in. But overall, I think Stars of Akarios is a very good game. I have enjoyed my time with it a lot over the last day that I have played it and gone through the prologue. It has a lot going for it. And I guess a couple other negatives. I don't think that the writing is great. It's good in small chunks, but when you're reading a couple pages at a time, it just feels kind of clunky, especially in the dialogue. A nice pass from a professional author and a good editing might be able to tighten that up a little bit. And I also feel like there's not a lot of art. There's a lot of iconography, but there isn't a lot of art, especially in this scenario book. You're basically just kind of looking at setup for your art. You don't really get cool pictures of aliens and different different planets and that kind of stuff. I would like to see a little bit more art, a little bit more just more art on the cards. The cards are pretty boring. A lot of the cards, they just have icons on them without any flavor text or anything. So maybe a little more art. I guess you do get a lot of art in the exploration cards. So that looks pretty nice. But those are really my only negatives. My feelings for this game are quite positive, more positive than I thought. It's just not the game for me at this time. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed taking this detailed look at Stars of Akarios, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.